Welcome back to the main session after the breakouts. A lot of really interesting conversation in both breakouts. It was really good to see. This next one is a special one in terms of our content. We're going to give you some context from a panel of founders about kind of what they're seeing from a funding perspective, what they're seeing in terms of their business, what they're experiencing, what they're needing in a quite frankly weird and odd environment for fundraising and operating a startup. I'm also excited to introduce you to our moderator, the other co-founder and CEO, the best one because I work for him, Shubham, who will be taking us through this session. Thanks, Shubhi. It should be on. You don't need to touch it.
Hello. Check. Awesome. Thanks, Paul, and thank you everyone for being here today. So exciting to see everyone. I've also been told that we are the ones standing between you and lunch, so we'll try to make this as painless as possible. But no, again, thank you for coming. Heard some amazing content on a bunch of panels this morning. As Paul mentioned, this panel is sort of looking at the other side of the table. So I'm joined with some amazing founders and CEOs who we would call friends. So excited to hear from them about how they're navigating this market uncertainty, how they're thinking about changing their plans, how they're thinking about engaging with investors. So excited for the conversation, folks. And as Paul mentioned, just quick intros. I'm Shubham, co-founder, co-CEO of Affinity. So let's get started. Maybe we'll start with some quick intros. If you could just maybe say a little bit about you, your company, what sort of stage it's at, so folks can contextualize, because we have a bunch of different stages of companies here. So, Christina, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Christina. I'm the founder of One Schema. We're a seed stage company, and we're a platform for data import for SaaS companies.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amir Movafagi. I'm the CEO at Mixpanel. We are also a SaaS business, late stage-ish, I guess. We're over 400 employees, across the 100 million ARR mark earlier this year. Is that enough intro?
That's great.
Okay.
Amir. And congratulations on the 100
Thank you.
crossing. It's awesome.
Hey everyone, my name is Malika Momand. I am the founder and CEO of Esper, which is an enterprise SaaS company. It's a policy management platform for government agencies. Started Esper in 2018, so we're a little over 4 years old now. Raised our Series A last year, and based in Austin, Texas. Have a little over 40 employees.
Hey folks, I'm Gleb Polyakov. I'm the co-founder and CEO over at Nihilus. We're a infrastructure API for communications for both understanding and engaging with your users and customers. We're about 260 people right now, Series C stage growth company.
Awesome. Well, it's exciting to have you all here. Thank you for coming. So let's maybe dive in. Obviously it's been a bit of a weird 18 months. Building companies, being in the market, lots of ambiguity in terms of how to navigate things. One thing we're Affinity are curious about, and I'm curious about hearing from you guys. How are you thinking about the different scenarios, and how are you planning for different scenarios in this sort of uncertain time with your companies and your teams? Maybe Gleb, start with you.
Yeah, for sure. So I try to take things from the approach. So the way I view the current macro is that right now we're in a situation where the capital markets are certainly not what they were last year. The major indexes continue to trend down. My personal pet crystal ball theory, I don't know, type of thing, but I think we'll see in Q1 the markets go back up a tiny bit in terms of the public sector, based on I'm seeing just a ton of excess capacity being held, especially by the brick and mortar retailers. Which in my mind means they're going to have to get rid of that inventory, have really big deals in Q4 for the Christmas shopping season. We'll see a boost in revenues there. Q1, we'll see that go back up again. The underlying sort of supply chain stuff will then continue to be there in the way it is now, and then we'll see another dip down, and then probably a 6-month-long recovery into 2024, or 6-quarter long, recovery into 2024 before we start getting back into like more bull market type conditions. So for me and my business on the B2B SaaS side, we actually have two things. We're a developer product, so it's all like 80% inbound and SMB, which is a very velocity sale, like 15, 20K ASPs for us. The other side of the business is a tops-down enterprise motion. So for us, we're looking at, okay, currently the enterprise sales cycle times tend to be extending out. And everything I'm seeing says they are kind of going to continue. You got to get real rigorous there. So one way we're looking at it is pulling back some of our enterprise investments, pulling back some of our like R&D bets on the engineering side where they weren't going to pay off for another 2-3 years anyway, focusing much more on the existing business, optimizing for growth and scale. And then I'm a big numbers geek, so I go to the P&L pretty regularly. And look at it a couple of ways. The first one, which is like the most conservative one, is like what's current cash in the bank, what's current monthly burn, divide those two. That's like one view at your functional runway. The other view is to go and look at, okay, if we actually make any of our forecasts and it's not steady state, what is the functional runway there? And then like how do you want to pick the risk tolerances with your investors, your boards, your leadership team on figuring out the balance between runway and investing in the growth and performance of your business. Where we landed on at Nihilus doing about optimizing for 26 months of cash runway, while at the same time, like the downside there is like, yeah, we're pulling back a bit on the top line growth there. Instead of going for like 120% growth, we're taking that down to 70% growth year over year as the board goal. Love to exceed it, but I want to maintain optionality right now for the future.
Very thoughtful, very methodical. Thank you. Malika, you want to tell us about how you're thinking about it?
Yeah, I think you hit on a few key things, which is like maintaining optionality and then also like doubling down on your existing business. So not taking as risky R&D bets that won't pay out for another 3 years, which is something we're definitely doing. I mean, even before markets kind of tanked, we have always, I'm sure every founder does this, like you have all these different scenarios and forecasts of like, what if we don't hit our revenue goals, like, you know, and scale that back, and what does that impact burn? And we usually have like 3 to 5 scenarios running of like best possible case scenario all the way towards, oh shit, we've really got to like fix some things. And we were in a good position because we raised our Series A in September of last year. So we entered 2022 with like a healthy amount of runway. And so we saw the markets tanking and we said, okay, we should probably, you know, not plan on raising a Series B this year or even in 2023. So it really sharpened our discipline around what are we spending money on this year? We have healthy runway. Where do we want to put our money that's going to give us the most bang for our buck? And to us, that was very much focusing on customer retention, investing in our existing product, making it even stickier, tightening up our ICP, so our ideal customer profile. What are the customers or prospects that we think have the highest propensity to close within the year? And how do we put all of our sales motion towards that, and marketing as well? So those are some of like the things that we put into place right away. We have, you know, we've bumped up our metrics tracking across all parts of the organization. I was actually just talking with Dustin earlier today about the sort of like initial value point and how you get there faster with customers. That's something we're actively talking about. Ultimately, just right now we're optimizing for customer retention and existing growth in accounts with customers, and then making sure that our sales team is focused on deals with like high propensity to close and not necessarily going to net new markets right now, just focusing what we know and doing it really well. And then in terms of managing team psychology, which I think is a really important part of the equation here, just being very transparent with all parts of the team. Here's our runway. Like if we ever hit, you know, below this amount of runway, like here are the things that are going to happen. So people are aware and can plan for their own lives. One of the things that I've really thought a lot about in building the company is people join a startup because typically they want to be involved in more hands on the ground and be part of hard conversations. And so they need to have the information to equip them with, you know, being ready to make a move if they need to, and also, you know, contributing to the dialogue and helping us solve problems as they come up.
It's great that you're sharing that kind of detail, in a very transparent way, it sounds like, with everybody in the company. I'm really curious, on the question of the scenario plans, but also, what level of transparency are you giving because it's a double-edged sword, right? If you're giving people all the detail around every single plan versus, sort of this is the plan and, we'll deal with, as things go. I'm curious where you stand on that spectrum. Obviously, bigger scale. So just wondering how you think about that.
Yeah, we actually, so right around when the pandemic first began and everyone kind of flocked to being remote, we switched over to not just having our biweekly all hands, but becoming a much more of a writing company. So we, right around the same time, we got this tool called Notion. Some of you may know it. It's a great product. I don't get paid when you buy Notion. But it really gave us a tool to start publishing. And one of the things that's commonly misunderstood about transparency is, at some point, like when Stripe was early, I don't know if they still do this, you could have access to all the emails, in the company. And transparency is not just our US government is incredibly transparent, right? You can have access to floodgates of information out there in your local and federal government, but doesn't make it effective, right? In terms of actually getting the key messages out there. And I think it gets lost in the noise. So for us, we really wanted to go through this major synthesis of what are the key things that we want to capture and how we're shifting our planning. And one of the things that we did early on was just be very transparent about the way we were going to actually look at leading indicators that would tell us if we did, in fact, need to react or change anything. We published that. Mixpanel happens to be an analytics tool where we were able to actually graph everything in our own products. So here are all the leading indicators. If we see a decline in these demand metrics, then we know that we are now in fact experiencing something that's going to hit our top line. And then a second follow-up to that communication was effectively a contingency plan on what would we do. Okay, let's say we had we saw the dip in demand. What would be the threshold at which we would react, and then what would the actual action be on that? And we communicated both of those to the company, and it was really well received. It was certainly, we didn't cut corners and didn't hide the ball, but we did spend a ton of effort to try to figure out what was the most important parts of that we wanted to get across, so the core messages don't get lost.
That's awesome. Sina, what about you?
I think that when the market downturn first started, it was a really scary time for a lot of founders. Just access to capital is one of the most important things for your company, and feeling like you might not be able to have that even if you're hitting great metrics is a really scary thing. My co-founder and I sat down, though, and thought about aspects of the downturn that could be an opportunity for us, because even though access to capital is more difficult, a lot of other things have gotten easier in the downturn. As market conditions become more difficult for new competitors to enter the market, that's one thing we don't have to worry about anymore. As well as on the hiring side, things have gotten a lot easier. So we focused our resources on, what are the things that have changed and how can we double down on those opportunities? I really liked what some of the other folks said around transparency as well. I think that transparency ties really closely in with ownership, which is a really important value at our company. So how do we help our employees see this is the reality of the market situation, and how can you step up and take ownership and help us propel the business to the next level and achieve our next milestones? Also taking advantage of, changes in the hiring market, we've been able to, pick up a few really key employees that, for example, have been laid off from other companies who we know are really, really great. As far as, runway, I definitely echo what a lot of the other founders are thinking about. We've been trying to stay above 24 months of runway and planning different scenarios around that, just to make sure that we're in the best possible position to raise our Series A when that time comes. You definitely don't want to be put in a situation where you're running out of capital and not able to achieve your metrics, and that's the end of your company. So I think there are definitely some silver linings to the downturn. Oh, also what Gleb was saying about their sales cycles resonated. We primarily sell to mid-market and SMB companies. Those deal cycles seem to not have slowed down as much as what we've seen with larger types of contracts. So really doubling down on the segments that are working, and focusing on the core parts of the business where we have been seeing success.
That's great. I'm hearing a theme of focus, prioritization, transparency. Don't invest in things that aren't going to pay off returns for 3 years or whatever. So it sounds like a lot of discipline being, brought back into how you're running your companies. So I'm curious, how does this look? How have because you're all venture backed, how have your relationships with investors evolved as you have sort of made these changes? How are you engaging with investors? In what ways have you found them to be helpful? In what ways you want them to help? Like, just curious, where your head is at as you're doing all the things that you mentioned you're doing. So maybe we start with you.
I think that the empathy piece is very important. It's a difficult time for founders. I also know that it's a difficult time for investors, as they have a lot of companies that are going through a difficult time right now. I think that transparency is also really important with our investors. At the end of the day, they're very large stakeholders in our company, and they want to see us succeed. And so having those conversations with them where they can reflect on what they're seeing across their portfolio, what things are working for other companies, and what things aren't working, and they can provide advice that helps us see beyond the very limited window of what we're seeing. I mean, actually, what I was just saying about, there's a lot of opportunity that comes with a downturn as well, or some insights that we got from some of our investors who have seen previous downturns. I'm a first-time founder. I've never been through an economic downturn before as a founder, and they were able to tell us about a lot of previous portfolio companies that have seen success coming out of markets like this, the types of things that they did, and what sorts of strategies we should consider.
Well, things have gotten so much better now that our investors have so much time on their hand. It was actually quite being truthful. This summer was great because the time back was kind of visible in a way that we have a very small board. Andreessen Horowitz led both A and B, and then we had Bain Capital lead our C round last year. And the level of engagement and just like enthusiasm, support is 10x higher, just by more bandwidth, more focus. I think the theme that came out earlier was the companies are focusing more on their existing customers. I think similarly, private equity VCs are focusing more on their existing portfolio companies. And that was very apparent, earlier in the year. So it's been great.
Amir, this might be a controversial question, but if there was one thing that you wish your investors did more of in this time, what would it be?
I think one of the on the back of every CEO, every founder's head is the time when there's anxiety and there's fear. Are likely some of the most openings to actually go grab more market share if you can be ahead on. I think obviously the earlier Gleb had a very, very specific point in which he feels like he can go back on offense, which is awesome. I don't think that level of clarity or conviction is necessarily shared across. I think there are in moments, if you can provide a level of support and encouragement on when to go on offense when everyone's kind of on their back heel or trying to figure out how to preserve and survive. I think that kind of confidence and assurance when, even if you're in doubt on when to actually, okay, this is our opportunity to go lean in. I was surprised to hear about some of the pullback in R&D, just because this is, for us, it's been kind of the flip where we really want to, we're being less, are much more prudent on where to go invest for market share growth on go-to-market, and been more aggressive on trying to find engineers in the market. We haven't been able to recruit engineers for or as many engineers as we wanted, given how competitive the talent market has been. And it's been a relief, candidly, to finally be able to go get some of the key engineers that we've been looking for. So I think that would be the biggest advice I would have, is just lean in and really give the courage and confidence. At the end of the day, we're all trying to get market share here, right? We're not on the other side of the spectrum.
Awesome. Thanks. Malik, I'm also curious about that from your perspective.
What could investors be doing more of to help?
Yeah. How's your relationship changed with them, and what could they do more of?
First, I think what you just said about, anytime you're operating out of a fear mindset, your decision-making capabilities are capped. Because you are limiting your potential in a way of what you think you can do. So I think that's actually really profound. I appreciate it. Because I was reflecting on all of our investor conversations, and everyone has been like, need 24 months capital, you should be really concerned, you may need to fire people. Like, they've all been operating from a fear mindset, frankly, and I understand that. I think there's a big distinction between existing investors in Esper and then potential investors, and how we've been maintaining and cultivating relationships with both. With the existing investors, I think that we've always leaned on them for strategy, talent, and capital. Those are sort of the three big buckets, and we just have kept our normal touch points. We opened a convertible note, which I'm pretty sure every company did, and all of our existing investors put money into it, which is really appreciated. For the prospective investors, like folks that we really want for our Series B, these conversations have become much richer. So I'll go to New York and have a couple of days where I'm catching up with team members and also just chatting to investors and getting their take. And there's almost less pressure in the conversation, because we're not raising right now, which is the best time to raise, and they're not really deploying capital right now. So the conversation feels less measured and more free flowing. Here are some challenges we're going through. What do you think? And we're sort of having a real dialogue rather than just trying to get to diligence and term sheet, because that's going to be a year or so away at least. So I think those two dynamics of existing investors relationships have stayed strong. And I think it's just a testament to, how great they are and the loyalty. And the newer investors, there's way less pressure. Because one of the things that I've always felt frankly insecure about in fundraising is there's it always feels from the founder perspective, there's a slight power differential between you and the investor. And right now I just don't feel that in talking to new investors, which is a nice change of pace.
No, I mean, I think that's all exactly on point. The biggest change I've seen is that, so I've raised 175 million for Nyla so far across 6 rounds. So we have a populist cap table. And I'd say the cream rises to the top. The folks who are the best, who are supportive, the ones who are there, and I forget who, I think maybe it was Reid Hoffman originally, but it's the best support you want at a board level, at an investor level, is someone who's very kind, empathetic when things are going poorly, when times are tough, and someone who's super rigorous and on you when things are going well. When oh, we blew out our numbers by 200%, why the hell did you guys not do 400%? What kept you from doing that? Those kinds of questions when things are going well are much more suited. So what I've seen is, and we've restructured our board observers, restructured our board ourselves. I brought in an amazing Peter McKay from Sneak, the security API company, to come on as an independent director. Because what I found is that the folks who have prior operator backgrounds in the investor community are the ones that understand and have perspective. And the folks who are, at the very least for Q1 and Q2 of this year, entirely operating from a place of fear are the folks who they went straight into VC from Stanford, from some Ivy League, which is not to say anything bad about them, but it's the incentives are really rough there. They've been working so hard for 4 or 5 years, working their way up in this guild system that is investment. And now they're seeing that it will take another 4 years before they're able to get back and get outcomes for the work they're doing. So it's okay, well, you're not going to get your micro sliver of carry for a while. In the meantime, you have to prove IRR somehow and get your deals marked up somehow if you want to progress your career. I get that you're freaked out, but you're also creating a ton of work for your portfolio companies. So stop that. It's not helpful. The ones who are amazing, the ones who are very supportive, are the folks who don't come in saying, hey, you need at least 5 years of runway, which that was literally a comment I got from one of my investors. It's the folks who are saying, okay, cool, what is the opportunity? How do you take an advantage here? What are the milestones? For us, we found that hiring right now is incredible. The hiring market right now is insanely good. we're also finding that the M&A markets are fantastic. I don't know about you, Amir, but we're getting about 2 or 3 companies coming across our desk looking for a roll-up, looking for a way to exit in the current markets. Like, there's a ton of opportunities out there right now for growth if you're creative, if you're willing to make those bets. And sort of my line is like, let's not cut burn. Let's make sure that all of our spend is strategic.
Makes a ton of sense, Club. And maybe while we're on the investor topic and asking a lot of investor questions, because we are amongst a lot of investors, and would love for that. I'm sure they'd love to hear this perspective, which is, obviously you've done many rounds so far. When you think about future investing, future fundraising, how has your perspective changed, if at all? Like, how are you approaching fundraising? And you mentioned some of this, but I guess I wonder if this answer has changed pre and post sort of this slowdown or uncertainty. What is it that you want to see in an investor? When you're talking to them about a potential fundraising round, how do you suss that out? Yeah.
For me, it comes down to, like, do they actually understand the market, and are they actually transparent as to what their incentives are? My whole business philosophy is like, I'd love win-win situations. Like, let's create really interesting win-win situations where we all provide each other with value. If you're saying, oh, we don't have an investment thesis, we invest in everything. Seed through E+, we do everything. Check sizes, whatever. We lead and participate, and like just whatever comes across our table, we take. It's like, oh, there's no metrics. Yes, there are. There are metrics you look at. There are specific MOIC multiples you want to see. There are specific metrics that you and your partners around the table, when you're discussing deals, are talking about. Share them. Like, there's a conversation to be had there, is what I would say. And in terms of like staging investor conversations, I would say that the prevailing attitude, although it's shifting out of it a little bit, that I'm encountering is that folks are feeling like a little bit like they're dumpster diving. Like, oh, there are no good companies out there right now. Every company has blemishes. Oh, I've got to find a great deal and get like a major discount value. And it's like, is that the right mentality that you're going to come from to find a great deal to get into? You tell me. I'm not an investor. But people can tell the mindset you have when you start talking to them.
Very helpful, Gleb. Malika, what do you think?
I think maybe kind of what you're getting to is like, what is the level of presence an investor is bringing in any interaction you have with them? They're looking at their text while you're Zooming. That's not very nice. I think like I want to work with investors that are aligned on the company path and can also challenge my own thinking around certain things. I don't like being surrounded by yes people. In fact, I think I thrive under a certain level of like anxiety where I feel like people are questioning me because it forces me to prove things out. So I think that's really important. We're planning to raise our Series B next. And with a Series B, that's usually like your bigger growth stage. And so working with investors that can have been through that before and can guide us through it, connect us with the right talent points that we need, and advise like where the pitfalls are is going to be really important. I wouldn't say that the market downturn has changed my philosophy on working with investors too much. I think a lot of this still rings true. Although the one thing that I have done more of recently is just sort of like reference check investors with other founders. Are these people legit? They've been nice to you? Have they been helpful? Like I used to sort of like take every meeting and maybe was a bit more naive, but now I've gotten a little bit more rigorous with checking to make sure other people are verified.
Yeah, I was going to say, the point here that really resonates for me is being opinionated on the call. We're all, as operators, we're incredibly passionate about what we're doing and what we're building. And I think if you're at a stage when you're approaching a company that's still not close to being public, right, far away from that milestone, there's a genuine interest in really wanting to know whether you actually understand and know what we're building and what problem we're trying to solve. And then specifically where you think you can help us, right, and create value. And I think that it does, but it doesn't have to be just that, right? There are potential places where you can also be extremely opinionated, but know that your value as an investor isn't necessarily helping and providing another perspective on how to operate and how to build market share in within the business, but it's the preparation toward becoming public. And then why? Like, why are you best suited for that, right, relative to other investors? And I think having come out of this thing this past November, having done our Series C, that really was the key differentiator for us. It wasn't even the term, we weren't necessarily interested in optimizing for the term sheet. We just genuinely wanted someone helpful and someone who not only had good ideas, but there was conviction from the beginning on why they were engaged and wanted to participate.
Sina, what about you?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that we care about when we're looking for investors, and I think hasn't changed given the market conditions, is sort of that pre-existing conviction in your business and your market, and they really understand what you're trying to do and why. I think in a lot of cases, we'll have conversations with investors and they'll give us advice about something that shows that they really don't understand some core part of our business. They'll say, you should talk to this founder. Their sales motion looks like yours. You're like, oh, I don't know. We sell to developers. They sell to construction companies. I don't know if there's a lot of analogies between our sales motion. And I think that when you get on even that first call with an investor, it's usually pretty apparent the extent to which they've really thought about your space and have a thesis around it. And I found that folks that really have thought about, what our company is doing, why, the opportunity, are the ones that continue to help us push the boundaries of what our company could be. And like Malika was saying, not just be yes people in the room because they actually have a convicted opinion about the future of our industry. I think the other thing that's really important that has changed given the market conditions is the empathy piece and understanding how these folks would react if we had a down quarter, if there was a major change in our market that caused things to go sideways for a little bit. Because, we're not here to build this company for 1 year or 2 years. We're here on, a decade-long journey together to build something really big. There's going to be months, quarters where things aren't going exactly the way we want. And you want someone by your side that isn't going to get scared or freaked out because things aren't going exactly the right way every single quarter. They have a long-term perspective on what your company is going to do and help you see the opportunities in front of you when you face challenges.
Thanks for sharing that. It's really interesting. I was just reflecting on all your answers, and despite the different stages your companies are at, the answers are remarkably similar, which is perhaps a takeaway for folks here, in terms of what it takes to be an investor that founders and CEOs like working with. Doesn't sound like it's rocket science, so that's good.
One small thing I'll throw in that I found super helpful. So our last round was led by Tiger last summer. And I think we're still the only company that Tiger's ever taken a board seat on. So it's just us, me and John Curtis over there. But one thing that they do really well is that they actually deliver on this promise that a lot of other funds have made of hey, we'll help you with talent acquisition. And their approach is that they just pay a recruiting firm to do it. Their perspective is hey, we have capital. Why should we build up a team internally to help you recruit and then have to triage between just here's a recruiting firm, here's a check, they'll help you. I found that super helpful in upgrading the team.
That's great. That's great perspective, Gleb. So maybe let's pivot a little bit, from investors to the team, right? I mean, the team is the most important asset we all have in making the companies and their dreams come to life. We talked a little bit about focus, transparency, in terms of what we're communicating with the teams. How have you seen this sort of change the team's morale? What's sort of your pulse? And also, what's your mechanism to sort of keep the team engaged, excited about the future while sort of this uncertainty exists? How are you navigating all that? Maybe Amir, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's in many ways we're seeing a lot of our employees have pretty much experienced just the good times, and it's been a pretty amazing. Well, there was maybe a 30-day window at the beginning of the pandemic where people weren't sure. There were a lot of uncertainties, but for the most part, thanks to a prolonged, interest rate policy, it's been a pretty tremendously booming, 20 odd years, right? For tech and specific, well, I shouldn't say 20 years, although I feel like, 'cause I moved to the Bay Area in 2010. And I think since then it's been pretty nonstop for all of us. In some ways, I think this has been an opportunity to provide some reflecting on the core fundamentals and why things that we've all, well, I shouldn't say we, but for those of us who've actually gone through a few cycles, why fundamentals matter, right? There was a concept like Rule of 40, Fred Wilson, popularized as a healthy framework, and it was never meant to be about cost savings. It was never meant to be about contingency planning. Rule of 40 was just a smart way to do business, right? That if you're taking all the profit you're making from your customers and reinvest it back and take 100%, reinvest it, you should at least generate 40% growth. I think that got lost somehow, that it was a smart rule of thumb, and it's just any business is just smart. It's never a bad time to just implement sound fundamentals that drive growth. And there's this sort of like a false notion that somehow if you increase your burn rate, or if you deviate from that and go to rule of 20 or 10, or just kind of you're just like trying to aggressively grab market share, but it's just distracting from the fact that your stuff you're doing isn't working. So like you want to go back to actually really focusing and deploying capital more efficiently, and it ends up accelerating your growth. And by the way, we're a real case study of this, right? Mixpanel became profitable shortly after the pandemic, and we accelerated our growth on top of that. And I think that was a moment to really help bring the employees from a morale standpoint, that it sort of like the hype and the things that are thin, vanity metrics like celebrating the number of employees you have or celebrating some other metric that honestly doesn't matter. Getting back to what actually matters, celebrating those things as part of the transparency, that rallies because people ultimately want the truth. And they don't want just the feel good stuff. And it was hard, honestly, like last year, 2 years ago, making these changes when, obviously multiples were what they were. But now that things have obviously corrected to an extent, I think people really appreciated that sort of foundational, get the truth, follow through, transparently show what's working, what's not working. And our attrition during the Great Resignation, was we had the lowest company attrition. Last quarter, we're at 3%.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, it pays off, but it's really tough transition. It's, going through that few quarters of like getting the mindset shift is very, very challenging.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? What does that tangibly look like? Are you sort of recommunicating these messages in like a weekly all-hands meeting? Are you like, what is the operational like day-to-day to make that transition happen?
Yeah, like everything else, first of all, you got to have the feedback loop. Right? Like if you don't have the feedback loop from employees, if you just show up to all hands, deliver something, and then you're like, okay, I said it, it's over. It's communicated, it's done. But one is, it's not just the reinforcement of like, okay, there's a doc, there's an all hands delivery on that doc, there's a alignment with the executive team that message is being continued to communicate consistently across the organization. But then there's this ongoing loop from actually getting NPS scores from employees, getting direct, every 6 months we do a very deep dive with employees on what's working, what's not working, and why. And on every other month we do a very lightweight, just an NPS score. And I know my obsession about NPS, but this is sort of like just a core foundational input of like, is it working or not? Is communication working? How do we iterate? How do we make it better? And then employees go, when they actually see you're paying attention and reading, this last NPS survey we did, there was 1,000 comments that came in, and people actually took the time to write exactly why there were a 9 or a 10 or why there were a 5 or a 6, and that number has been steadily on the rise, almost like it's getting to a point where I'm like, it's okay if it slows down a bit because it's getting harder to bend that curve.
That's great. That's a really neat process. Sounds like you have going on to get consistent, regular feedback. Malika, what about you?
We also have a pulse survey, is what we call it, every month. I think alignment on culture and managing your team's psychology starts with the founder and the co-founders, and then expands to the executive team. It always starts top down. Like your VPs or your exec team have to be so in line with how things are going to change, which, to your point, vanity metrics are gone. They never really were at our company, but now they're definitely gone. And I think like communicating that to the team. One thing you talked about feedback loop. I think the way things have to be communicated to people sort of varies depending on their archetype. Engineers, I think, appreciate something that's slightly more data driven and like a little bit more, less of a narrative, more of a like, this is the facts and what we're going to do about it. And I find the sales and marketing team, they like the narrative. They want to see the vision, the big picture, all of it. And I communicate that to all the teams, but there is such an art to securing buy-in with each of the individual teams, and how you communicate that will vary depending on like the archetype that you're presenting to. It's all a sales process at the end of the day of like what you're trying to achieve with a company. And we think about sales usually as like an external thing to customers, but there's so much selling internally to your executives that you hire, and then selling them to get on board with the vision, how we're going to achieve that. And then also to people that, are like lower down in the ranks, so to speak, how you motivate them and persuade them to get on board too. So I don't know, I think like, we've put a lot of thought into the messaging of where we're going, why we're implementing certain changes, change management, if you will. And a lot of it comes down to who are we talking to? Are we talking to an engineer who like scrolls Twitter obsessively and like, follows all these certain profiles and has a lot of like, buzz in their head? Or are we talking to a salesperson who, just is kind of worried about their commission? Are they going to get it? So.
Makes a ton of sense. Gleb?
Yeah, I think team morale is critical, right? Like a company really only has two stakeholders. You have your customers, because if you stop giving them value, they stop paying you, and then you're no longer a company. And you've got your employees, because if they're unhappy, then they leave, and you're no longer a company. Like that is just like a legal fiction for a group of people. For us, I have seen that and honestly, this is an unsolved problem on our end. We went full remote when the pandemic started. We always hybrid, but full remote now. For ICs and most managers, they're hungry for direction. They're hungry for that buy-in, that feedback of like, are people listening to us? Do we know what we're doing? Do we have understanding of where we're getting to and why? Cool, let's do it. As long as that the clarity is there, as long as the loops and feedback cycles, or maybe iteration cycles, are there on a bi-weekly at least basis, for us, we found to be super effective to make sure that folks are heard. We're reiterating the message wherever there are changes. We're making clear why the changes are made and all that. What I found hardest right now is really for directors and up, for the senior leadership teams. Mainly because whether they have had 10 years of experience in leadership roles in the past while, or whether they're a little bit newer to leadership, they've only been leading in good times, in the bull markets. So they don't yet have the tool set, the skill set as well developed for, everyone's really concerned about this economy. Everyone's telling me about why is our company versus that company going to be the one to make, how do I get to that place of conviction and guide them, lead folks through the concerns, versus just pointing at, look at all our great metrics, look at how well the market's doing. We're going to be a $10 billion company next month. Don't even worry about it. Let's go. That energy doesn't work right now. And so leadership's had to really learn how to recalibrate around that message of hey, your job's not to motivate people. Your job is to address the concerns and give a path forward and give an example of how that's done. And if you want to be effective, you'd better do what Mala was saying, you'd better customize the message to how people need to hear it.
That's really interesting, Gleb, and I totally, that resonates a lot, because we have sort of this, similar leadership, and a lot of folks have seen good times, right? I'm curious, again, tactically, how do you go take folks through that transition? Do you do some kind of training with the leadership on here's how you should operate, or how do you get folks to come around and learn, a pretty crucial skill in a very short span of time, because we don't have all the time in the world?
I don't, again, it's not a solved problem on my end. We're trying the leadership trainings and offsites. A few folks had to move out because they couldn't get out of that fear mindset, that like sellsword mentality of like, okay, cool, but when am I getting my secondary? When, I've been in the startup game, this is my third one, and I really want my win. When is that going to, like, that's that place of fear that you're talking about that you're never going to get success from, that you're not buying into the long-term incentive of the equity that's supposed to motivate you towards making the right choices. So yeah, I guess like moving some people out, bringing newer people in to get good energy in there, and then just trying to reemphasize, hey, here's what we're doing here. We've got to have a solid business. We want to make money. We want to change the world in all the following ways, and the opportunity's there. So let's try to do it.
Makes a lot of sense. Christina, any thoughts? How are you thinking about this?
Yeah, so definitely a little different for us because we're a 10-person company. We're all in person, so not thinking as much about executive leadership. The executive leadership is me and my co-founder. And since we're in person, I mean, what Malika said about culture coming from the founders really resonated. I think that the way that my co-founder think and talk about things, the rest of the company really absorbs that because we all sit in person together. And as they see us make decisions, they've sort of seen shifts in the ways that we make decisions, especially as we've shifted to increase transparency around a lot of the things that matter to us and our core business metrics. I think that ownership is our top value, and we've continued to lean into that more and more during this economic environment, because the more that your employees feel that they are able to actually take ownership over important decisions, is ultimately what pushes your company forward and helps you build an effective organization. We have seen a huge increase in the ability and desire for our employees to take ownership as they have gone increasing transparency about why this actually matters for the company. It just feels a lot more tangibly tied to their outcomes.
Awesome. Well, I can keep asking questions all day, but I'm getting the hand signal from our head of marketing that we are now in the way of lunch. So I want to thank you folks for coming. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Hopefully it was a motivating discussion for our audience here. But yep. Thank you again, and I think that's all we have for this panel, folks.